Hi everybody and welcome to this week's Dollar Index Market Update. You're speaking with Nick McDonald of Trade with Precision. On the screen here we have the Dollar Index contract. We have a daily on the left, weekly on the top right, and a monthly on the bottom right. Interestingly, we had a big week last week. We had the FOMC coming out and we also had non-farm payrolls coming out. That created some real volatility in markets. What I found really interesting was that even though last week we did a purely technical update, and when the Fed decision came out and we got a big move down on low volume and then a move back up again, even still, this exact line which I drew in last week, well before the Fed decision came out, we came down and we tested that exact low where we'd identified support on the weekly chart even before that news came out, and that happens to be the exact point where the price turned around. So even though there was fundamental news coming out, technicals there still held true. Let's look back at this daily chart. In last week's update we said we're looking for a breakdown through these lows to continue down towards the lower end of its range. Now it only spikes down towards the lower end of its range. It was very low volume down there on the Fed and we came back up, but nonetheless we have moved down. We've continued to be bearish and we've pushed lower. Now the question is, we've got this up day on Friday. Are we going to continue back up, or are we going to find resistance here and continue back in the downtrend? If we just look at the monthly chart just for a moment, you'll see how much of a crucial point we are at now for the US dollar. And you see here the dollar index, which is just a great measure of the US dollar strength to be looking at this contract. And then if you've got a view on dollar strength, to be actually trading this contract. But you can see what a crucial point this is, whereby if we break down through that level on a monthly chart, that is very, very bearish. But if we turn around and really hold at that level, then that would be very, very bullish. So while we're going to provide an outlook for this week, on a bigger picture scale on a monthly chart, this is a really crucial turning point. We could break down this week and still continue up on a monthly basis. Equally, we could go up this week and still continue down on a monthly basis. So we'll keep a really close eye on that monthly chart and just watch as it really tests and continues to test, I imagine, the 7,500 level, just to really see what happens here, because it is a very vital point for the dollar. So let's come and have a look at some of the currencies that have major weightings, and we'll come back and tie this into our view on the dollar index. So let's have a look at euro dollar. And in euro dollar we see here that this 1.4 level, again a line that we're drawing in last week, and in fact been talking about for many weeks. It's a very significant support level where price has been tested, supported and resisted many times in the past. Last week I said it looks very bullish because even though we'd rejected above 1.4 many times, we'd also really failed to go lower on these candles. Interestingly though, what's also happened this week is that on this particular, last week's candle, we broke up above 1.4 and we really rejected and failed to hold above it. So that's quite significant. And 1.400 remains a really key level. What we see on the daily chart though is we've just pulled away from the averages and now we're pulling back towards them, which is just a good positive sign. If we come down to the 480-minute chart, this is an 8-hour chart, and you'll see here that coming down to more intricate intraday detail, we can now see that just above 1.4 we have this price action support and resistance level about 1.43, and what's happened here is the price has pulled back in, tested that level, and has closed in fact right on that level. So it's going to be really interesting as soon as the market opens this week to really see where that opens up, and do we start to bounce off that level in the early part of this week, or do we break down through that level. So euro dollar is going to be a key one to be watching and seeing what happens there. Quick look at cable. And we'll start with the weekly chart. Seen here on the weekly that we broke up through this 1.6, which we'd identified as the key resistance on cable. We broke up and we hit the next level of resistance. So what I'm looking for is flat levels, flat precise levels where there's been multiple tests of that same level. We came up and we found resistance there, completely expected, but we've got this resistance now towards the top of the range as well. Question is, will we get through that level? I think we will. Let's just have a look at why I think that. So I think that we'll break up through this midpoint of resistance. I think we'll be testing this upper point quite soon. If we just come down and look at lower time frames, look at the daily chart, it remains very bullish. We've broken to new highs. We're a bit overextended from the averages and we're due a pullback. Just like any healthy trend has a pullback into the moving averages, this is likely to do it as well. If we come down and just look at some intraday detail here, I've got a 4-hour chart on the left and an 8-hour chart on the right. This is just a nice, clean, consistent uptrend where price is moving up and pulling back into what I call the buy zone, this area around the 10 and 20 period moving average. We're just pulling back to the buy zone. We hit some resistance at the high, pulling back in, expecting to make a higher low and push back on again and test the top of that range. Let's have a look at the dollar yen, just very briefly. Somebody asked why I haven't been spending much time, for example, looking at dollar yen, and so very quickly can show you why, because it's ranging. If we just look at this on an intraday basis, and here we're stuck in a range. Candles have got very big and very volatile. I don't like big volatile candles. I'd much rather have a nice, clean, consistent trend. Smaller candles, professionals controlling the market rather than amateurs. When amateurs are controlling the market, you can see that they don't really know where it's going. You get these big spiky candles. I'd rather just wait and see where that goes rather than trying to predict where it goes. Dollar CAD is another one that has some weight in, and this is also interesting because whether we get dollar strength or dollar weakness at this particular point, what you can see is dollar CAD is in a range itself, and we've got a very well defined upper and lower point of that range, and we're right down at the lower point of that range right now. So if we find dollar strength, we should get a nice rally back up towards the top of that range, and if we get dollar weakness, we should get a nice breakdown through it. So for a trading opportunity, dollar CAD is an interesting one to watch, just to see where we get this strength, and we can look at the dollar index to gauge that strength. So let's come back to the dollar index now and tie this together with where I think the dollar index is going this week. As we said, the weekly chart and the monthly chart are showing these significant support levels. But even though it looks like we've tested that, we only tested it very, very briefly on the FOMC decision coming out. So we've got support down here at these lower levels. I still believe that this week price will come down towards there and test it. If we just look at this daily chart, I'll maximize it and just try for a moment just to ignore these two big spikes on the candles, because big spikes that come out around news and on low volume tend to mess up the charts a little bit technically. So for a moment, just try to ignore the big spike on that candle and the big spike on this candle. So just put them aside for a technical picture, and what we still have is a nice, clean, consistent downtrend with lower highs and lower lows. So if we're taking the bulk of the volume and the bulk of the daily activity into account, we're still in a nice, clean, consistent downtrend. Now, just pulling back towards the moving averages. If we come down and look at this on lower time frames as well. So here we have a 4-hour chart and an 8-hour chart. If we look at both of these, and again, just ignore those spikes just for a moment, what we have here is a nice, clean, consistent chart on the 8-hour chart, making made equal lows here, pulled up, made a lower high, broke down to lower lows, pulled up and made a lower high, break down to significantly lower lows here for a good downtrend, pulling back into the averages and still making, at the moment, lower highs. Same thing is happening on the 4-hour chart. We're just in a nice, clean, consistent area of making lower highs and lower lows, and it's completely expected. Even as we do that, note how the indicators too are pushing down. How as the price makes lower lows, how my MACD on the 4-hour chart is making lower lows, so is the RSI. Here on the 8-hour chart, price is making lower lows, so is the MACD, and so is the RSI. That's a good sign of a good, healthy trend where price and indicators are converging. I believe that this will continue down for the week, and that will continue down with dollar weakness down towards the test, the bottom of that range. It is just too strong a level down here for the market not to be drawn to it, and the market is really is drawn to these big levels where it's like a point of memory where there's been a lot of support and resistance in the past. There's likely to be support and resistance in the future. We already proved that last week, but the market will be drawn to the level and likely to get down there and test it. I don't expect any major breaks or bounces off that level this week, more of a steady week down towards testing that level and probably finding some support there, and we'll reassess that again at the end of the week. Happy trading all. I hope that helps your trading, and I'll speak to you next Monday.